Absolutely. Thanks ever so much, Lara. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Smith, and as Laura says, I'm here today to talk about your journey to accreditation as part of our Demystifying accreditation series. So, the aim of today's webinar is to just give you a little bit more information for organisations that might be considering embarking on a journey towards gaining accreditation in their respective fields. As Laura said, my name's Crystal Smith and I work within the Development and Scheme Integrity team within UKAS. I've worked with UKAS now for 9.5 years, primarily within the healthcare section, but obviously latterly in the development section, helping new customers and existing customers with new areas progress to that accreditation journey. So obviously, as Laura says, any questions, do put them in the question and answer function, and we'll address these at the end. So the webinar is part of a series that will repeat regularly throughout the year. The first in the series ran last week, which was the purpose of accreditation, which aims to introduce the concept and value of accreditation. There's also the third session, which is next Wednesday, I believe, which goes into a bit more detail about the role played by a UKAS assessment manager and how they'll assist you through your accreditation process. So the aim of today's webinar is just to provide you with some more information and resources on the next steps in your journey once you've determined that accreditation is right for you and your business. I'm going to cover, is accreditation right for you? Is your business ready to proceed with the accreditation process? How you apply and what the next steps are through the assessment process. So going through pre-assessment, initial assessment, what they look like, how we approach assessments, any findings, and then what the stages are to actually grant accreditation and go on to maintain. So first off, is accreditation right for you? So before you apply to ourselves, it's important to consider whether accreditation is the correct course of action for your business. Just to recap on the benefits of accreditation, so what they can bring to you and your business. So accreditation helps highlight gaps or weaknesses in operational capability and provides opportunities for improved organisational efficiency and outputs. It provides independent assurance of technical competence and helps set you apart from your competition because you have that independent assurance. The assessment process that accompanies accreditation throughout the life of your accreditation can also help assess, identify and reduce risk within your organisation. There's global recognition provided by accreditation, and this increases international acceptance for import and export of trade within your business. There's also a mutual recognition agreement through the likes of International Accreditation Forum, International Laboratory Accreditation Committee, and European Accreditation. And these go together to prove that accreditation can aid in the removal of technical barriers to international trade. Accreditation can create confidence in industry supply chains, and it's often specified by public and private sector organisations as a prerequisite for acceptance. Examples of mandatory accreditation activities include the forensic services in the UK. They're required to be accredited to ISO 17020 or ISO 17025, or both, depending on their attendant activities, as well as being reviewed against the Forensic Science Regulator's Statutory Code of Practice. The control of asbestos regulations in 2012 need to be accredited against ISO 17024 for testing, and reviewed against the approved code of practice and guidance. Also in healthcare, screening services such as infectious diseases in pregnancy must also be accredited as part of government requirements to participate in those screening services. So accreditation can provide confidence to employees, customers and stakeholders of a commitment to quality and service improvement from yourselves as the accredited organisation. Accreditation also supports the generation of new business, potentially providing expanded access to new markets and regions. Surveys carried out regularly by UKAS to their customers each year help gain a better understanding of how the commercial benefits of accreditation are perceived out there in the market. There's a few statistics on the right of the slide which feature the results of this year's survey, where 93% agreed that accreditation provide confidence to their customer and stakeholders. 76% agreed that it gave them an advantage over their competitors in the same field. 85% agreed that accreditation improves the quality and validity of their work. And 71% agreed that accreditation helped them to win new contracts or indeed maintain existing business. So, as I said, UKAS provides accreditation across a whole range of services for different types of organisations. We'll cover testing, product certification, personnel certification, testing, proficiency testing, management systems, to name but a few. It's important to establish whether accreditation is applicable to your business and the sector that you operate within. And UKAS accreditation is granted to organisations that have demonstrated that they fully meet the requirements of the relevant national and international conformity assessment standards, whatever they may be within your given field. If you're a testing or calibration medical laboratory, or you provide certification, inspection, or validation and verification services, then accreditation is likely to be relevant, if not essential, to you in your area of expertise. Accreditation is also applicable to a number of healthcare areas, such as physiological sciences, image sciences, medical physics, clinical engineering, biobanking, and proficiency testing within the healthcare remit. And finally, accreditation is also applicable to producers of reference materials in a number of other sectors. So one of the first things you'll need to do when you've decided to take your first step on your journey to accreditation is to purchase the relevant standard for your scope of activities. Standards can be purchased from the BSI website or from ISO directly online. Some healthcare standards are also freely available, such as the IQIP standard for physiological sciences. So accreditation is then granted against a specific standard in your field. A conformity assessment body can be accredited to a number of standards for various activities. So one organisation can have a list of standards that it conforms with and indeed has accreditation for its business. Or likewise, a business can just have one because it only covers one area of expertise. Standards are formulated by groups of experts, and they're British, European and globally recognised standards. And we can offer accreditation to all those types. Standards outline the requirements that must be met by your organisation to succeed and deliver the services safely and effectively. The standards define best practice in many different areas and come in a number of different formats. So during the early stages, UKAS will work with yourselves to establish if your business is actually ready for accreditation, and if not, what options are available to you as an organisation to prepare for accreditation. Excuse me. So UKAS has various resource materials to determine whether your business is ready to apply. Before you begin your journey, there's a few things we recommend you do and you consider. Make sure you're really familiar with your standard that you're seeking accreditation for, and that you meet the requirements that it states in the standard itself. Equally, make sure you're familiar with any support and publications associated with the standard. One of the things you can do to ensure this is to subscribe to UKAS's monthly publications newsletter, which provides essential information about new publications being withdrawn, documents that are inviting consultation, etc. We also have a number of readiness assessment tools. We've listed the 17025 one there, but there's now a number of different standards. And these have been developed especially for organisations considering application to those relevant standards. It's a free online tool available on the UKAS website, and it'll help test our calibration laboratories, particularly with the 17025, but as I said, there are other readiness tools on the website, and it'll help you identify any gaps in the requirements of the standard and your current operating status. The UKAS Training Academy also offers a range of courses that are relevant to all accreditation standards in order to help organisations prepare for accreditation assessment and also enhance the knowledge of the standard for quality professionals within your sector. There's a full list of available training courses, including in-person, virtual and on-site training. We can also deliver bespoke training at your own premises. And there's also e-learning options, and all these are available on the UKAS website, so please do have a look. In your journey, as I said, you should also identify the relevant support UKAS publications, which will be required to gain accreditation. There's also international publications that are relevant to your area of accreditation, whatever it may be, and these are available on the EA, IAF and ILAC websites. All of these are linked from our UKAS publications page. So all support and publications and technical content can be found on the UKAS website. As previously said as well, you can also sign up to receive monthly updates. And that'll tell you the current status of any standard that you may be seeking accreditation for. So, mentioned the readiness assessment tools earlier. We've developed a series of these tools to help your organisation decide whether accreditation is right for you. If you go on the UKAS website, there's a section, Readiness Self-Assessment Tools. And it's a self-assessment tool that has a set of questions designed to allow yourself to check that your current policies and systems meet the expectations of each standard. Against each criteria, there's 3 potential responses: yes, no, and somewhat ready. And organisations can use these to describe how closely they feel they meet the requirements of the standard. The readiness assessment tools are best completed by individuals who have a good understanding of how their organisation manages and performs its technical activities, and do have some responsibility for the quality and customer management side of the business. As I said, as well as the 17025 one, there's also 15189 for medical laboratories, 17021 for management system certification bodies, a 17065 for product, process and services certification bodies, IQIPS for physiological sciences, and very recently added the BS 70000 for the accreditation of MPS, which is medical physics and clinical engineering, and diagnostic imaging services. So the UKAS Training Academy, as I said, provides digital learning and face-to-face learning. We offer public and on-site training courses, as well as providing international advisory services. Whilst training is not a mandatory requirement for gaining accreditation, it can be useful in enhancing the knowledge of some of the more complex areas of the standard, or provide the tools and techniques to fill in the remaining gaps and ensure your systems and processes are developed in line with the requirements for accreditation. Our portfolio of courses provides UK and overseas delegates with knowledge and best practice of accreditation practices and conformity assessment systems. Each course is run by expert trainers who are committed to providing you with the knowledge and skills to add value to your organisation and confidence to your customers. And all these trainers are either current or previous senior assessment managers. So there's also the opportunity to ask assessment managers specific questions in relation to the standard. The training courses cover our scope of accreditation, certification, healthcare, inspection, laboratories, verification and validation, etc. So just to look a little bit more into applying for accreditation then. So this slide describes the application process. The first step is obviously complete the correct application form. All application forms are available on the UKAS website under applications, and there's a number of forms there, so you choose the specific one to yourself in your area of activities. The application form includes details of what you've got to submit, key policies and procedures documents that we will need to see, and proof of legal status to ensure swift processing. The supporting materials can include the relevant application form, which we call AC forms, management system documentation, the legal status of your organisation, signed copy of the UKAS agreement, and payment of the application fee. Organisations that are based outside the UK who require an accreditation should contact sales@ukas.com in the first instance before submitting any documentation or fee to ensure we'll get the correct things from yourself. Once your application is submitted and all fees have been paid, an assessment manager will be assigned to help you through the assessment process. There'll be an introductory call with UKAS where we'll discuss your application needs and any questions you might have. So we'll review your application and we'll check our ability to carry out the assessment of your conformity assessment body in terms of our policy and procedures, our competency. Do we have the competent assessors to come and assess your area of activities, and the availability of personnel suitable for the assessment activities and decision-making steps within UKAS. So we'll check that we've got fully competent assessors to cover your specific area. The review also includes the ability of the accreditation body to carry out the initial assessment in a timely manner. Do we have the competent skills ready and ready to go, or will it take a while for us to get them skills resourced? Where the initial assessment cannot be conducted in a timely manner, this will be communicated to yourselves as the conformity assessment body and will give you some idea of the timeline. Right, the next step is pre-assessment. So pre-assessments in most cases are optional. We do advise that customers take them, especially if accreditation are new to your area and new to yourselves, because what this does, it allows you to meet your lead assessor or your assessment manager and familiarises the team at your organisation with the assessment process, what it looks like. It allows you to ask relevant questions relating to the initial assessment, and it provides an impartial external perspective on your processes and procedures and can identify possible areas of non-conformities before you get to the initial assessment stage. So it can identify any areas where there's gaps and where you may need to put in additional resource. Some common areas that are identified on pre-assessment is that there may be some misunderstanding of some requirements within the standard and/or sector schemes. Some normative requirements within the standard have been missed. So all of the standards have normative references at the front, and you need to take these into account when you're preparing for accreditation. Normative requirements may have been incorrectly determined to apply to your organisation. So we'll give you a little bit of direction with that. The IES, ILAC and EA, which I said was international and European accreditation, mandatory documents might not have been implemented, so we'll point you in the direction of them and discuss what's required. There may be some areas of the organisation where, for all the policies and procedures exist, they're not yet implemented. The practice in the documents and policies might not match. So we'll compare what's actually happening in real life, if you like, with what your policy and processes say should be happening, and identify any gaps there. And is the business doing the right thing, but lacking the documented evidence required to prove that? So in all walks of life, there's some very, very good activity goes on, but not always documented in policies and procedures, and obviously the standard requires that. So conformity assessment standards. So the standards themselves generally share, but are not limited to, the following common elements. They've got a general requirements section, then a structural requirements, resource requirements, process requirements, and then management system requirements. The management system requirements, again, generally include, but may not be limited to, a management system where there's documented, implemented, and then maintained, document control, record control, how you manage non-conformities and corrective action, improvement actions that you may take to address any risks and opportunities that you've highlighted, your internal audit programme, and the management review. So, as I said, pre-assessment prepares you for the initial assessment. If you haven't had a pre-assessment, you can go straight into initial assessment. Again, usually depends on the experience the organisation's had with accreditation before. If there's very little experience, we would always recommend that pre-assessment. But what does the initial assessment look like? So there's an opening meeting which will take place to agree the arrangements between you and your organisation and the assessment manager and the team. The assessment will involve a detailed review of records, systems, processes, and overall competence of your organisation. We do this via interviews with staff and managers, as well as direct witnessing of key activities. We do full vertical and horizontal assessment audits across the whole of your scope of activities. We then give a debrief of the assessment, and any findings that may have been raised will be discussed throughout the course of the assessment, but be finalised at the closing meeting. UKAS will provide a full report shortly afterwards following the assessment, and this will detail any findings, including improvement actions identified against the accreditation requirements. You, as the organisation, are asked by UKAS how you'll address them, so it's up to yourselves to suggest the improvement action that you're going to put in place. So there's various ways in which an assessment can be delivered, and the assessment approach is also always considered ahead of the delivery. In terms of the assessment approach, we can use both face-to-face and remote assessments. The latter technique was developed during COVID-19 lockdown periods where we couldn't get on site as much. So we developed tools, kind of video links, Teams assessments, etc. for document review. What we do is we determine the assessment on a risk-based approach. Usually, initial assessments are face-to-face. But we can conduct subsequent assessments remotely if the risk is low enough. So a blend of face-to-face and remote assessments can enable improved focus and efficacy. A lot of the assessment activity can be conducted offline, which is why we ask for a lot of documentation beforehand so we can read it and prepare ourselves for the assessment. And we ask for this to be submitted prior to the assessment so that things are more efficient when we're on site. The need for assessors to see the customer's work environment and the availability of appropriate information systems are significant aspects that need to be considered in determining if a remote assessment can be considered. So, assessment findings. Excuse me. So first off, what is a finding? You'll hear us say findings quite a lot. Um, so findings are things that can be positive or negative. If the positive, we'll comment on them in the report and also through the debrief. That will found some really good areas of activity. The negative findings we refer to as non-conformities. So non-conformity is the failure to meet one or more of the requirements outlined within the normative requirements of a standard. So you're working in non-conformity with the standard requirements. And UKAS refers to these as mandatory improvement actions, and we document them on a mandatory improvement action report. So the assessment team will input the non-conformities into the mandatory improvement action report and will put them into the UKAS assessment portal. If this isn't possible to complete online whilst we're on site, an offline improvement action report is provided, and that gets uploaded after the assessment when we've got access to internet capabilities. The customer is required to upload to the UKAS assessment portal details of the outcome of their root cause analysis of the finding, a determination of the extent of the non-conformity. Is it related to just one area? Is it generic across the business? What's it affected? Also, any actions that you might have taken and the documented evidence provided to evidence that you've taken the appropriate action. The portal submission, together with the support and evidence of actions taken to address the findings, needs to be completed within the specified time frame, and this is usually 12 weeks. UKAS will review the submitted information and support and evidence to determine whether the customer has addressed the non-conformities in a satisfactory manner, and feedback will be provided to the customer on the outcome of the review within 4 weeks of the receipt of that evidence. Once all the evidence has been satisfactory, the findings have been satisfactorily closed on submission of satisfactory evidence, there's a requirement within UKAS that there's an independent decision-making process. And this can be made by either one person within UKAS or a committee who will review the report and confirm whether the recommendation that the assessment manager left with you on site and in the report is appropriate and whether a grant of accreditation can be awarded. This process is usually split into 2 stages. There's a provisional decision, which is done before the submission of evidence. So we'll look at the depth and breadth of assessment, whether the witnesses' activities were carried out, whether there was anything in there that would provide an obstacle or assessment, and what findings were raised. And then there's a final decision after the findings have been cleared. So it'll look at the evidence that was provided, the decisions that the assessment team have come to on the closure of those findings, and whether that documentation was satisfactory. The reason we do this is so that there's no conflicts of interest, there's no kind of bias anywhere in the accreditation process, because it's looked at again a second time by that completely independent person who's had nothing to do with the assessment. Got ahead of myself in the slides. Basically, that slide is just kind of confirm what I've just said. Output from the decision-making process includes confirmation that accreditation can be granted, and we issue an e-certificate and schedule of accreditation, which goes on the UKAS website, which includes the scope of accreditation and the activities that we've offered accreditation for. Once the customer has been granted accreditation, they can also use the appropriate symbols of accreditation, which I showed on the slide earlier with the symbols and the area of activity underneath it. There are rules of use of these symbols, and these are rules that are set by government, by the Department of Business and Trade, because the symbols, the UKAS symbol, include the crown. So there's very specific rules as to when you can and can't use it. So the accreditation symbols can obviously display their accreditation through the use of these symbols relevant to their accredited activity. So if you're a tested lab, you would use the tested one, that's third in line on the bottom there. As I said, we're licensed by the Department of Business and Trade to use and confer these national accreditation symbols, which signify government recognition of the accreditation process. So that's not just UKAS recognition, that's government recognition of the accreditation process. We do encourage customers to use the national accreditation symbol because they're very good for promotional purposes. You've been through the process, you've done all the hard work, why shouldn't you use them? And as I said, as long as the conditions of the use of the logo and symbols are met, you're well within your rights to do that. If you trade overseas, you can also use the ILAC or IEF mark to signal global acceptance. So if UKAS accredits a customer, that is accepted globally. So if you do trade globally, you can use that. You may use the symbols on certificates and reports, quotations, letterheads, etc., exhibition stands, websites, but you can't use them on vehicles, the outside of buildings and flags, on the goods and products themselves, and on the primary packaging. So, with regards to promoting your accreditation, we've produced a variety of materials to promote the benefit of using accredited services such as those you'd provide, that be downloaded, distributed, or hyperlinked to support quotations or direct marketing, and all can be accessed from the UKAS website. There is a set of promotional videos which promote accreditation, and these are hosted on UKAS's YouTube channel, and these can be linked or embedded on your website as well. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll also receive alerts as new videos are added. World Accreditation Day is held each year on the 9th of June, and this event's organised by ILAC and IEF, which is the International Accreditation Forum, and it promotes standards, metrology and conformity assessment community. You're encouraged to use the materials produced for this awareness day to promote your own accredited status to your customer and stakeholders. The themes and materials are published on the UKAS website and the social media channels nearer to the day. So once you've received your accreditation, how do you maintain it? What's the next steps? So hopefully you can see this clearly. It shows the overview of the entire process. So there's the application, there's then the contract review where we'll look at it and decide whether we have the resources and what the assessment team will look like. As I said, there's this optional pre-assessment, if applicable, initial assessment, and then we've granted. After grant, we'll then go into the surveillance cycles. So each accreditation cycle is 4 years. You've got surveillance at year 1, surveillance at year 2, and surveillance at year 3. And year 4 is your reassessment year, where we'll look at everything again and then renew your accreditation for a subsequent 4-year cycle. So as I said, your accreditation's confirmed on an annual basis through surveillance activities with a full reassessment every 4th year. The first surveillance assessment takes place 6 months after the grant of accreditation. So that's the actual grant. When you get that email saying you are fully accredited, your schedules on the UKAS website, etc., 6 months post that, and then on a yearly basis after that. We've got 3 annual surveillance periods of assessment activities conducted in years 1, 2 and 3, and then your reassessment in year 4 to commence the next 4-year cycle. At the initial assessment stage, you'll be provided with an estimate for the work involved and the costs involved with the 4-year cycle. At any time during the life of your accreditation, if the estimated effort changes, for example, if you increase your scope or decrease your scope, you'll be provided with an amended estimate, and each year you'll get a quotation for that year's assessment before we come on site. You do things to assist maintaining your accreditation. You must inform your assessment managers of any changes that may affect your scope of accreditation. So if you've stopped doing something, or if you started doing something and want to increase your scope, you must maintain your technical competence. Ensure you keep up to date with regulatory changes within your sector. Subscribe to update UKAS publications and technical bulletins that come through UKAS to ensure you've always got the latest accreditation requirements. Inform UKAS in advance of any relocation of premises from which your accredited work is performed. Maintain your internal audit regime. Ensure there's ongoing effective document control, and retain the required quality records and technical records throughout the period between the assessments. So accreditation costs. All assessment fees are effort related, which means they depend on the complexity of the scope of accreditation being sought. How many sites have you got? How many different activities you've got? Are you international? Are you just in this country? Are you a small business with just kind of one person? These fees include not just the time the assessment team spend at your site, but also the office time. So the planning of the assessment beforehand, the reading beforehand of any requested documentation before we get on site, and then the office time after, the writing of the report. A list of current fees can be found in the UKAS Standard Terms of Business, which is on the website. And it's also worth noting that if there's any findings raised, these are charged separately as what we call closeout activity. So typically, the larger or more complicated the scope is, the more assessment times required, and that increases the cost. Accreditation assessments are completed annually, and the 4-year assessment, which ends with a reassessment, is subject to decision. So in between the maintenance surveillance visits, your assessment manager makes the decision to maintain in between the initial and the reassessment. At the reassessment, it's made by an independent decision maker. So, for example, a scenario of a small testing laboratory, say, for example, it's got a very small scope and it does one activity, it analyses soil. You look at an application fee of 1,500. A pre-assessment can be anywhere between 3.5 to 5.5. Again, for the one testing laboratory, the one activity, the one site. Initial assessment between 7.5 and 11.5. Each annual surveillance can be between 4,000 and 6,000, and reassessment can be between 6,000 and 9,000. Now, this is a scenario, and obviously each application is incredibly different. So please do note that. Also, it's worth noting that the costs listed on the UKAS website are exclusive of VAT. So if you're interested in proceeding with accreditation, the first thing to do is contact UKAS. This shows the various departments that your queries can go through, but any contact at UKAS will be able to put you in touch with the right person. You contact us, either call us directly or through the website. There's a contact form there. There's also a direct link to training. Directly, you'll be able to advise you if you are interested in any training courses that are there. Right, and at this point, I will hand over to Laura.
Thank you, Crystal. That was a really great, clear overview of the process. We've got excuse me, we've got a Q&A session now. So if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A function, and Crystal and I will do our best. We have actually had a good question already about IQIPS accreditation. So somebody's asked, if you're doing IQIPS and have two modalities, so for instance, respiratory and cardiac, do you apply for two IQIPS accreditation? Or is it one accreditation application which will cover all the physiological science services that particular service provides?
Yeah, so you go onto the UKAS website and you download the AC form for physiological sciences, and it's one application per customer. So if you're doing one modality or you're doing 10 modalities, you write them all on that form. And what we'll then do is we'll look at the form when it comes into us, and we'll get somebody to call you and see exactly what you do with it. So within cardiac, what do you do? Within audiology, what activities do you do? We'll find out exactly what your scope is that you're seeking accreditation for, to ensure we'll bring the correct experts along with us. Different modalities, obviously, you'll get a bigger team. So we will bring a cardiac physiologist along with us, an audiologist along with us, or a vision scientist along with us. We'll bring the number of experts as is required by your scope, but it's absolutely one application, and you'll only have the one assessment manager who will cover all of those things with you as well, so it keeps it nice and tidy.
Right, yes, so it's one application, but the scope will be whatever the service needs it to be. And then, but the one thing that might fluctuate, I'm guessing, is the cost, depending on what needs to be assessed.
Absolutely. The more people we'll bring and the more things we have to look at, the longer we have to be on site. So absolutely, the cost will increase with modality.
Super. We've had someone ask if they can have a copy of the previous webinar that we've done in the series. Yeah, absolutely. When I send the recording of this one round, I'll share links, because we put all the recordings on our YouTube channel. So I will share those next week. We've had another question in the chat function, just saying, re the fees. If we looked to have an overspend this financial year and apply before April 25, is there scope to pay up front if there's less money in their pot for the next financial year?
No. So what you can pay up front is obviously the application fee, and we can also, before April, get your initial accreditation booked. So we would get the fees sorted for those two. What you can't do is pay up front for subsequent surveillances, because we won't know at that time what that will look like. Within that year, you may increase your scope, you might decrease your scope. We might decide you're low risk, so we'll do it remotely, which means the cost will be different all the time. Obviously, costs are subject to increase each year as well, and while we do aim to keep them as low as possible, there sometimes are yearly changes to the fees, and because of that, we can't preempt what that cost would look like for subsequent surveillances. So absolutely, if you applied now, we could get the application and the initial accreditation fees dealt with, but subsequent years we would have to deal with as and when they came round.
All right, thank you. We've had one more question about fees and costs, actually, specifically around assessment findings. The person's just asked that this be explained further. I think possibly he means with regards to if there's a requirement for additional visits.
Right. Okay. So, based on the recommendation, if we make the assumption that the recommendation is that we recommend to the decision maker that you go forward and are granted accreditation based on the satisfactory closeout of any findings. What we then do is, as I said, you get 12 weeks to submit that evidence. And depending on how many findings there are, that's chargeable, yeah. Because we may go under assessment and we may raise 60 findings, which obviously is going to take a lot longer than if we raise 2 or 3 findings. So we give a cost that's related to the number of finds. Also, you may only have one finding, but it may be a massive one, whereby you have to rewrite an entire process and we have to check verification and validation, etc. So we look at the amount of time that'll be in there. Also, it may be that the findings have to go out to different members of the teams. So if we take the example of the physiological sciences we mentioned earlier, we'd have to send the cardiac ones to the cardiac expert. We'd have to send the audiology ones to the audiology one. Your quality management ones would go to your assessment manager. So we'll look at all of that and then we'll charge accordingly as to how long it's taken us to do that. With regards to, so the normal assumption is that you satisfactorily close them in that time. If we ask for repeated evidence, further evidence, because what we've been provided with doesn't satisfactorily close the finding, we allow a backwards and forwards with that. But if it becomes clear during that backwards and forwards that the organisation isn't grasping the requirements of the standard, it may be that we either need to come back on site to sit and go through it with yourselves, or it may be that actually something you've provided us with actually causes us concerns with regards to risk associated with that practice. So there may need to be an extra visit there. All of this will depend on what's provided to us. Obviously, if we do need to come back for an extra visit, it will be chargeable, and it will be chargeable as an on-site visit. This, I wouldn't say this is unusual because it does happen, but the usual practice is that it would satisfactorily close out and it would go through for the decision-making process. So all you would be charged was the close out for the remote review of the evidence. Obviously, we wouldn't just descend back on site. If we needed to come back on site, we would give you an estimate for what that would look like, and you would have to decide whether you were willing to pay that cost or not, and that would depend whether you would then progress through and carry on through the accreditation process. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that gives quite a lot of extra information actually. Thanks, Crystal. We've had, first of all, we've had quite a few people who've asked for links to both the presentations that we've done in this series so far to be sent through. So yes, I think the easiest thing is if I just say, when I send out this information about this presentation, I will send all the details of the one that we did last week, and also links for you to sign up to the two webinars that we've got in the series taking place next week as well. And just so you know, if you register for a webinar and then you're unable to attend on the day, we do send the recording out to you anyway, so that's worth bearing in mind. We have also had another question about tests. We've got a lab that performs hundreds of furniture-related tests. So what this person's asking is, do they need to validate each test independently, or are they able to group them into categories, or is it just the lab overall that's assessed?
Right, so we'd come in and we'd look at the lab itself, but then we would look at each individual test. The standards, any standard requires that each individual technical activity is validated or verified for accreditation purposes. So you must be able to provide either the verification or the validation, depending on what's required, for each individual test to get them on your scope of accreditation. Now, some tests you may not be able to verify or validate, and it doesn't mean you can't perform them, but they won't go on your schedule of accreditation. We wouldn't offer accreditation for that individual test, and indeed you couldn't claim accreditation for that test. So it's up to you what tests you apply for. So it may be that at initial application of the 100, you've maybe only got 50 verified. So you could apply for those 50, and we would assess those 50. And then when you've got the verification validation evidence for the subsequent 50, you can then apply to extend your scope.
Brilliant. Thank you. We talked about the scope of IQIP's accreditation and applications and scope. Someone else has asked, is this the same if you require or you perform multiple modalities under BS 70,000 and also ISO 15189? Is that one application with a broad scope or multiple multiple applications?
Right. So if we take them individually, if all you have is 15189, but you have a lot of things within it, it's the one form, it's the AC6 form. If you just have BS 70,000 but do a lot in it, it's just the BS 70,000 application form. However, if you are a trust or a CDC, which is a community diagnostic clinic, that wants all 3 standards accredited, it's one application form but 3 AC forms. So
Right.
you'll fill in your main application form, which tells you where your business is, etc., and then you'll have an AC form for BS 70,000. You'll have an AC form for 15189, and you'll have an AC form for IQIPS. You send them all in together as a batch, and we'll assign you one healthcare assessment manager who'll be able to do all 3 at the same time. But there will be 3 individual forms.
Okay, so I've now got a question: is if that in that scenario, will they get multiple accreditations then, or is there a special type of accreditation for this CDC type approach?
No, they'll get 3 accreditations.
Okay.
I say 3. You'll get 3 schedules of accreditation. So you'll have a schedule of accreditation for 15189. You'll have a schedule of accreditation for your IQIPS, and you'll have a schedule of accreditation for your BS 70,000. Each standard you get a schedule for, but you'll only ever be dealt with as one customer, if you see what I mean. So you'll get one assessment manager who will manage the whole thing for you. But if you go on the UKAS website, anybody looking for your services will find 3 schedules of accreditation for the 3 standards.
Okay, thank you. Someone else has got a question now. They've asked, can I have some more information on training for laboratories? Is it relatable to medical laboratories and standard 15189? I can answer that in part, at least. Certainly, we do a lot of courses that are specifically geared, yes, to med labs and preparing for accreditation to 15189, to the most recent standard, and various other medical types of training as well, which we can send you a link to. We do currently have an offer on as well. It's worth mentioning, and again, I'll include this in the follow-up information that I send round. We're doing a sort of 10% discount at the moment, so it's worth keeping that in mind if you are planning on doing any training. And I can send this person links to specific 15189 training. Don't know if you've got anything you wanted to add to that, Crystal.
No, that's fine. As Laura said, there is specific. There's 15189, and there's also 17025 training courses as well for the other side of testing, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also some generic ones, which is things like internal audit training and the role of a quality manager and holistic approaches to healthcare. So there's some generic ones as well. And as we said earlier as well, if you have a number of people who you want on a course, rather than paying 10 individual fees, say, for example, if you needed 10, 15 people on the course, you can get in touch with our trainer and say, well, actually, could you do a bespoke one for us, and what would that cost? And there would probably be a discount involved in that as well. So depending on what you require from your organisation, there is that option.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I actually think we have come to the end of the Q&A. I'm just going to check the Q&A and the chat. Yeah, it looks like we've finished all the questions now. So just about on time as well, which is great. So once again, thank you very much, Crystal, for giving your time this afternoon just to give that a very comprehensive overview. And also, I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today for coming and joining the webinar. It's good to have so many people on and so many good questions as well. So with that, I will end the webinar unless you've got anything you wanted to add, Crystal.
No, that's great. Thanks ever so much for your time, everyone, and thanks for the support, Laura.
Oh, pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone.